I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can you all see that? Perfect. Great. All right. Give me 1 second while I get these views here. Okay. So, hi everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. As Liz mentioned, this panel discussion is titled Practice What You Preach, a conversation about transparent publishing with the Journal of Open Educational Resources in Higher Education. So my name is Chelsee Dickson, and I am the Associate Editor of Columns, Reviews, and Innovative Practices for the Journal of Open Educational Resources in Higher Education, and I will be moderating this panel discussion. And our panelists are Kristina Clement. She is the Journal of Open Educational Resources in Higher Education Editor-in-Chief. Hilary Baribeau, she's the Managing Editor, and Casey McCoy-Simmons, she is a first issue author. Okay, so just a brief outline of what we'll be discussing today. So we'll give you a brief history of the Journal of Open Educational Resources in Higher Education, also known by the acronym JOERHE. We'll have a conversation with prepared questions for our panelists about transparent publishing practices, as well as questions that we've crowdsourced from the community. And then we will have time for questions from our audience. Okay, so let's jump right into our questions. Starting with this one, the Journal of Open Educational Resources in Higher Education, or JOERHE, is a brand new Diamond Open Access journal. So what prompted you all to create an OA journal about this topic and at this level? And can you give us some background on how the journal was formed?
Yeah, thank you, Chelsee. So this is Kristina. And yeah, I'm happy to give a little background on the journal. So this journal was founded in 2021, and we put out our first issue last October in 2022. The founding members of the journal were myself, Hilary, and our colleague from the University of Wyoming, Samantha Peters. So the three of us last year shared the role of co-editors-in-chief. The journal currently is published by the University of Wyoming Libraries. The three of us met because we all used to work there. So that's how that relationship was formed. And we created this journal to fill a gap in the scholarly literature in higher education. So there are very few journals that focus solely on open educational resources. And as far as we're aware, this is the only journal whose scope is specifically on OER in higher ed. We are a Diamond Open Access journal, so no APCs ever. Everything is openly licensed. And in keeping with our theme of basically all things open, the journal is openly peer-reviewed, and completed reviews are published alongside successful articles. Our first issue, as I mentioned, was published in October 2022. It featured 8 openly peer-reviewed articles with their accompanying reviews. We had 3 columns, and we had 1 review of a published OER. And currently, work on the second issue is well underway. The journal is also growing and evolving. So in between issues, we restructured a little bit. We brought on 3 new associate editors. We have brought on 2 new copy editors. We have a new co-editor for our partner blog. And I, Kristina, I now hold the position of editor-in-chief, and Hilary is now our managing editor.
Great, thank you so much. So I just have a follow-up question to that. Why did you decide to create a Diamond Open Access journal? What was the catalyst for no APCs, or what did you think this means in the grand scheme of the open access movement and landscape?
Yeah, I'll take that question. This is Hilary. So it's really important for us to consider the content of what we're publishing and then the medium to support that content. And so we felt that Diamond Access was in line with the ethics of open educational resources. So Diamond Open Access means that we don't charge to publish and we don't charge to read. And one of the kind of factors taken into consideration when creating a Diamond Open Access journal is that it's equitable by nature and by design. Now, this isn't always true in practice, but it's definitely the bar that we wanted to set when designing this journal. It helped us to define an ethical and rights-based stance as a through line for the work that we wanted to do in this journal. And we felt that it was in alignment with the content that we wanted to produce around OER as a community-driven publishing model. It also allowed us to have a bit of autonomy in what we wanted to do, and to think creatively about how we would want to include various stakeholders and partnerships. There was recently, well, I guess in 2021, there was a study that was released in collaboration with Coalition S about diamond open access publishing. And I think that is really informative about the landscape and how diamond open access journals really contribute to the bibliodiversity of journal publishing. So not only are we trying to make sure that our publishing model supports the kind of through line of the content we produce, but also that it contributes in a real way to the academic publishing landscape too.
Great. Yeah, as a proponent of open access, I love that answer. So thank you so much to both of you. So now we will ask some questions to get an editor's perspective. So transparent publishing is not the most common practice in the scholarly landscape of higher education. To what sources did you turn to create your transparent publishing practices for the JOER-HE?
I'll start. This is Hilary. One piece that was really informative to our work was Charlotte Rowe's piece in College and Research Library News, which is about peer review and specifically library publishing and peer review. There's another publication that is produced by We Here called the Uproot publication. And I really love kind of how they have modeled their description of the publication, being really transparent about what it means, what its purpose is, and establishing a really specific viewpoint. And in line with that, We Here is also the forum from which Knowledge Justice, the book that was published, I believe, also in 2021 or 2020 through MIT Press. And the way that they conducted their peer review was to have authors review each other's work. So having that kind of community model of review and having it be very supportive, especially because of the nature of the work that they were producing. It really fit, that peer review model really fit what was needed to support the content, to support the authors. And I think that model is definitely something for us to aspire to.
Yeah, and I'd also like to add the College and Research Library's special issue about the one-shot instruction section, which was edited by Nicole Pagowski. That was an inspiration for me. I co-authored an article for that issue, and my co-author and I, we chose to go through what Nicole was calling developmental review, which was basically open peer review. And that was my first experience with that, and it happened to be a really, really good one. The review that she created for that special issue was a little different than what we're able to do for our journal. In that issue, authors and reviewers conversed in a Google Doc, and there was a lot of back and forth between drafts. But it was a really eye-opening experience to how peer review can be a positive influence on a paper, rather than something to complain about because you don't understand the reviewer's intent. So as I was working on this paper, we were working on starting this journal. So that really influenced a lot of the direction that I would like this journal to take with open peer review eventually. We'll talk a little bit later about sort of some of the constraints that we're under with the peer review process because of our platform. But what Nicole did for that special issue, it was amazing. And it really built community for each article. So we wanted to emulate that as best we could with the tools that we had.
Great. Yeah, it seems like there are a lot of sources, solid sources that you turn to find open peer review practices. And I hope that it catches on to others because it is a great practice. So this next question goes again to our editors, Kristina and Hilary. So peer review is one important area where transparency can improve the scholarly communication environment. How might a journal like the JOER-HE apply the same principles to other areas like governance of the journal, dispute resolution, recruitment, or retraction?
Yeah, totally. I'll start with this one. So I definitely feel like this is a conversation that has been a through line throughout this forum in terms of transparency and ethical practices, and that more eyes is better. And so we definitely have adopted that model, especially within our editorial staff. So decisions are not made in a silo. They are done in conversation with one another in order to incorporate a variety of perspectives. One limiting factor is the platform that we use, which is OJS. And that's simply because of the lack of our own kind of GitHub knowledge and coding knowledge. I would say I really enjoy the platform and really am a proponent of the PKP's OJS project here. But one of the things that it has been difficult to do is to put large blocks of text in a way that not only creates the visibility of those policies, but its readability. Like, who really wants to scroll through pages and pages of these documents? So not only is it kind of putting those policies out there, but making them actually useful for a reader or a potential author. So we're definitely looking at how we can make our policies more transparent without spreading the journal across too many platforms or having a single page that takes a million years to scroll through. And our goal is to not only be transparent about how we make journal-wide decisions, but also to make that information accessible in a way that engages our whole community.
Yeah, and like Hilary mentioned, our journal development is very community-based, it's continuous, and we designed it to be that way. So kind of like how we are constantly improving like on our open peer review process, we're improving on the journal. But building a community does take time. So there are definitely some aspects in terms of the governance of the journal that are not going to be immediately transparent, partially because we're human, we forget things, it happens. But we are learning every step of the way. So I think with every iteration of this journal, we are going to just continue to increase this transparency because we're going to identify our problems, we're going to solve them. But a lot of what we wanted to do with transparency kind of comes from within and then works its way out. So for example, like with our editorial staff, we do short-term contracts, ourselves included. Hilary and I are only on 1-year contracts each, just like everybody else. This lets us really continually evaluate our needs, our structure, our staffing, and it helps us bring diverse experiences and voices to the journal continually, rather than having one editor who's been there for 20 years. And being really clear and transparent with our contracts for our staff is a way that we can deal with disputes internally. But I think it will also help should we, deal with any disputes from maybe an author, reviewer, or reader. We have a really clear chain of command that our editorial staff needs to follow to investigate problems and resolve disputes. And I know the question mentioned retraction. We have not crossed that bridge yet, thankfully. But we do post on our journal webpage that we follow the COPE guidelines. And so they have guidelines for retraction. That's where we would likely turn to first. Should any sort of dispute arise, they have wonderful resources and have really been kind of a cornerstone of a lot of the ethics that we try and follow.
Great. Yeah, I think transparency is so important. Having worked on a journal where our practices are not as transparent and then working on this journal, it makes such a difference to really tell people, show people what you're doing, be as transparent as possible. And having said that, I do have a follow-up. How do you feel that these iterative practices increase the transparency in the publishing process for authors, editors, reviewers, and readers?
That's a good question, Chelsea. Thank you. I think for me personally, a big part of transparency is knowing what to expect. And I think this is really important for people who are new to scholarly publishing. But it really goes for everybody who's involved with this. It's, it's for our authors, for all of our editorial staff, our reviewers, our readers. Um, as I get deeper into this field and start expanding my horizons, I see how closed academia and scholarly communications can be. And so many people are trying to keep things behind the scenes, close to the vest. And I don't know about anyone else, that causes a lot of anxiety. I really prefer knowing what to expect. And so my hope is that the practices we are developing with this journal might work to alleviate some of the anxiety around scholarly communication and publishing for everybody who's involved.
Great, thank you so much. All right, so now we'll get an author's perspective. So these questions are for our first issue author, Casey. And so, Casey, as you know, the JOER-HE employs an open peer review process where authors and reviewers know each other's identities and the reviews are published alongside the articles. Tell us more about this practice and how something like this helps to build transparency in publishing practices.
Yeah, thank you, Chelsea. This is Casey, and definitely echoing what Kristina just said. Broadly, of course, increasing transparency for all authors, but especially for first-time authors. This was my first solo authored paper that I submitted and eventually was published. I was very fortunate, or I am very fortunate. I have wonderful faculty mentors who have tried to, demystify the publishing process as much as possible. As I co-authored other papers with them, was a first author with some faculty members, but really still had that mentorship of, like, this is how you need to submit things. This is what you say. This is how you respond to the editors. But this is my first time going alone. And I think having those experiences kind of all within the same couple years of each other as a PhD student, it was really wonderful because I think a lot of the review process here at the journal felt a lot more like I was getting that peer review conversation, feedback, community like we do in our classes. But with a research paper that I've spent a couple years on. So I did submit it somewhere else. Didn't get any feedback, it didn't go in. It was a large closed access journal. And then this journal sent out their call for first submissions. And I think it really appealed to me because my paper, I look at state policies for OER in higher education. And not only was the subject area match, but how the journal was set up, and knowing that, I Hilary was one of my reviewers, and seeing Hilary's name with, literally line edits in some areas, or it's what do you mean exactly by this? And knowing it's okay, here I can look up Hilary and I know her background. I know, where she works, where she's coming from, what context she's bringing to that feedback. And that helps me as an author kind of really, I guess, contextualize okay, this is, instead of holding on to my paper and be no, these are my ideas and this is, why I need to defend them. It's here are Hilary's questions and I'm going to answer those questions, and we're going to have that peer review conversation and to make this paper better. So then when it is published in the journal, it is the best version that it can be. And those transparent processes, and again, that peer review conversation community that has already come up multiple times, really helped in that process as an author, but especially as somebody new to the academic publishing space.
Great. Yeah, I also authored an OER review for the first issue. And you're right, absolutely. Seeing the reviewers and editors' names line by line and knowing they were real people made the process a lot better. And so another question for you, Casey. So this one has two parts. The first part is, why did you choose to submit your work to the JOER-HE? And secondly, how has your publishing experience as an author compared or contrasted between the JOER-HE and other journals?
Yeah, so I already briefly mentioned why I chose to submit to JOER-HE. I originally submitted, like I said, to a larger closed access ed policy journal. It was one of those long shot journals. It was like, again, it's like, I'm a student, PhD student. This is my first solo authored paper. I'm just gonna throw it out there and see what happens. Got a immediate desk reject. And I was like, okay, cool. What do I do next? And it was literally like, it lined up perfectly with that first submission call for the journal. And it was, I think, doing research with OER on OERs and then finding a journal that really aligned, again, not just with the subject area, but with the, ethics and real reasonings behind open education, which is what brought me to the research in the first place, was that draw to open education, to OER, to this community around these subjects, and then finding a journal that like directly aligned with that was just like, oh, this is actually really cool. And this could be a really cool experience as an early scholar, as a new scholar, to be able to kind of get into that space and get my research into a journal and a community that directly aligns, right, with what I'm doing. And as far as comparative experiences, I think another unique experience is I was first author on another paper with two other co-authors that was published in a large closed access journal and was doing the reviews side by side. So I was handling both of these submissions at the same time. And just the stark differences where, again, with the other paper, it was the typical like reviewer too, dang it, like they keep, taking stabs at what we're doing and it's totally off the mark and that's not even what we're getting at, but it felt, like because of the anonymity, it felt more personal and also felt like we had less control of what was happening versus with a JOER-HE, again, like being able to see the names of the reviewers and have those conversations and messaging back and forth very quickly, where it's like, if I had a question, like this wasn't clear, I could send that and get a response back in a very quick turnaround versus the sending in our feedback and then waiting weeks or months to hear if not only if those edits are fine, but like if we're even getting to the next step. And so I think that was, again, as a student, which I think is the last point too, which we've talked about in a conversation, that not having, that terminal degree, not being working in the field right now is also sometimes can be, a markdown when trying to get published. And that was something that Hilary and Kristina were talking about, like, oh, is actually like we're broadening the community and the people that are working and publishing in this journal. And so it wasn't like, oh, she's just a student. It was like, oh, she's a student and here's the work and how that stands. And that kind of like status was separated a bit more and wasn't, like I said, like immediately like disqualified for that.
Great, yeah, and I think you made the right decision to publish with the JOER-HE. Okay.
I'd just like to, sorry, Chelsea, I'd like to follow up and say that Casey has one of our most popular articles right now. And so she's really made an impact for the journal and I think for the field. And we really did want to just look at the quality of the work, not necessarily the position of the author, and then also just so pleased that we could support a budding researcher and give them a platform for their work. That's really important to us. So thanks, Casey.
Yeah, I echo that too. Okay, so now we have some questions that address academic publishing as a whole, and these questions can be answered by any of our panelists. So starting with the first one, what are some examples from your own publishing experiences that you have either incorporated into the journal or avoided?
Yeah, I'll start. This is Hilary, and I have a background in commercial publishing with a large academic publisher, and kind of managing the editorial office and kind of some author interactions. I definitely wanted to make sure that firstly, our editorial staff really felt like they were a part of decision making, that it was a collaborative experience, that also the author experience was one in which authors kind of knew what was happening when. And so an important part of our process is to be in touch with authors about the publishing timeline so that they know what to expect when. We varied this kind of throughout our issues. So this has looked kind of different between issue 1 and issue 2, but that definitely is a central tenet to make sure an author isn't sitting there kind of wondering what is happening. And I definitely think one of the definite benefits of moving to a platform like OJS is that you can see your paper move through the publishing stages in a really nice way, and it facilitates a lot of discussion on the platform. So I would say that is definitely a plus for OJS. And also, I would just say that it's just really important to make sure that we are clear about our stance and to model that through line. So as I said before, an ethical through line that supports open access, and a through line that supports quality over quantity and communication, a lot of good communication, which can get more difficult if you are trying to push more papers out. And so it's really important for us to have those relationships throughout the editorial office and with our reviewers and with our authors.
Yeah, for me, I have some similar perspectives to Hilary on this, though not from the corporate side, as an author. So timelines are really, really, really important to us. It's the big thing that we keep emphasizing, because that so far has been the single practice that we get almost explicitly positive feedback on. From our authors and those who interact with us. Even those who don't get published say they really appreciate how we keep to our timelines. So that's something we have tried incredibly hard to do. And I actually just got an email the other day from a journal that I submitted an article to 2 years ago, saying that it's finally going to production. And now, granted, this journal went through some editorial turnover and some shifts and stuff. And they said that, of course, things are going to be on pause for a little while, but 2 years is a really long time to wait for a paper that has already been fully accepted, reviewed, revised to even start the production side of things, so copy editing and layout. And that's just too long to wait. That's a really extreme example, but I hear all the time from people, from colleagues and folks around, higher education, that sometimes their paper will sit there for, 6 or 8 months without a decision or without anyone to review it. And we really wanted to make sure that our authors are not experiencing that. And the journal that took 2 years to get my paper to production, they weren't that great at communicating throughout. I think there were definitely some things out of their control there, so I can't fault them too much for it. And I'm just glad it's coming out now. But 2 years, it's pretty easy to forget that you even submitted that in the first place, which I think I kind of did. So while I was glad to hear that it's now going to production, it really made me reflect on some of the things that we do. So and I actually had someone email me the other week inquiring about our review timeline because they want to submit for the next round. And so, instead of just sort of saying, oh yeah, it's maybe going to take this many weeks, what I did is I actually outlined for her exactly our review steps, because those don't need to be private. It's perfectly fine if authors know what steps their paper is going through, whether they can see it in OJS or not. And I think it really helps open up the publishing practice and sort of just show what we're doing. So right now, if someone were to submit during our call for papers for JOER-HE, they could probably expect a decision, after the open peer review goes through, probably about 8 weeks after they submit. And that's about the average. we're pretty good at delivering on that. Of course, some are a lot faster, some are a little bit slower, but we have a really fantastic editorial staff this year who are just on top of it. Chelsee included, because she's one of our associate editors. I think Amanda is in the audience and she's another one of our associate editors. So we're really lucky that we've brought on some really fantastic people who I think not only really care about the work that we're doing, but really respect our deadline and timeline process. As far as positive experiences go, I think most of my positive publication experiences are actually with book chapters in edited volumes. Most of the books that I've contributed to have really high levels of editor communication. And I'm not really sure why that is as compared to journals, but that high level of communication is something we really strive to. And so going through, publishing with several different edited volumes and just seeing how frequently the book editor communicates with the authors, that was something I really wanted to emulate in what we've created. And I think we've achieved that and we'll continue to achieve that and improve upon it as we go through our issues.
Yeah, great answers. And as an associate editor, I can say that I've worked on another journal where our practices were not the same. And the practices that we do in the JOERAG, particularly communication, I think is stellar. It's really important to communicate with authors. Having been an author and been on the associate editor side, communication is key. And it's the difference between a pleasant author and an irate one. So definitely glad that we've incorporated that. So as a follow-up, in what ways are you measuring the success of the processes you're implementing, and how do you identify areas for improvement?
Yeah, I'll start. We have a couple of different measurements of success. They're both quantitative and qualitative. Again, I would say that really our measure of success is about the relationships that we form both within the editorial office and outside of it. So measured by the feedback that we get from our authors and reviewers regarding their experience with the journal, the interest and engagement with the journal and its contents, the feedback from our editorial board members, and then other measures of success are if the journal is sustainable across varying levels of leadership styles. So once Kristina and I are no longer with the journal, can it survive on? That would absolutely be a measure of success. Success really will be determined if it is sustainable over time and if it can encourage the evolution and growth of the journal. Something specifically that I have really worked on to make sure that the journal is still growing is incorporating the co-creation of some of our rubrics, having open discussions within the editorial office, and creating a positive and respectful work culture. So really kind of modeling open and transparent communication from inside out and creating multiple feedback points within the office and outside of the office.
Yeah, definitely. And to kind of build on that, we try to do a really open culture of feedback in our editorial office. I think we are achieving the goal of, creating kind of a brave space where we can really share our ideas, we can provide feedback to each other, we can point out problems, and we can respectfully disagree with one another. And because of this, a lot of our improvement comes from within. I also want to give Hilary a shout out because she has been creating some amazing documentation that is probably going to ensure the sustainability of the journal. So that documentation alone, I think, will be a measure of success. Like Hilary said, once she and I roll off the journal, because neither of us are intending to stay in these leadership positions for a very long time, or even a sort of long time. We want the leadership to turn over. We want new voices to rise to the top and try new things and bring on new people, because that really just matches with what open education is. So we do send out an author survey. We'll do that again this year. We'll probably also send out a reviewer survey and look at sort of what folks' experiences are. But yeah, success comes in a lot of different ways for a journal like this. And some of them are really obvious and others are a little less tangible.
Yeah, great answers, both of you. Okay, so this is a crowdsourced question. How can the JOERHE advance transparency about the labor involved in publishing an open scholarly journal?
Yeah, I mean, this is something I think about a lot. I think about, I mean, this is one of the major reasons why we decided to do open peer review and publish it, because we wanted to really make sure that the labor of peer review was visible and also was credited so that people could be credited for their work. And we still really want to do that. I think how that might look in the future could change. There are lots of ideas on how we could move that forward in different ways. But ultimately, we're working on building the sustainability of the Diamond Open Access model and keeping in mind some core values, which are that change in leadership is a good thing. Feedback vertically through the publishing process, from authors to reviewers to readers to staff, is valuable to the growth of the journal, and that there is no one right way to do things. So in the future, we're looking to make sure that we've posted our peer review rubric so authors can know what they're being reviewed on, to potentially add peer reviewers to our editorial staff directly. So it is a cohort of peer reviewers that authors can be in conversation with to create a more community-centered enterprise. And also, we want to pay our people. They do good work. We want to pay them. And so we are looking for funding models and opportunities to do that while maintaining our autonomy as a journal that supports change. So having that kind of visibility is really important in terms of like what we're looking for and how we're looking to develop. So we're definitely talking about creating a strategic vision or strategic plan and having that be somewhere for people to look at and know what kind of direction we're going and what we're really thinking about for the future. I did want to just say that I think one of the reasons we created this journal as well is to make sure that there was a home for OER research, to establish it from a practitioner-based field to an academic field, and not to devalue the work of practitioners, but to support their work, to get them funding, to establish the field of OER through citations and author credit, and that generative research helps to establish the importance of this work in the academic field. Citations are the coin of the realm here. And that my perspective is that OER work is often seen as the work of practitioners, and sometimes it's undervalued. So if we can generate a place for people to put their research, to have that labor as OER practitioners, as OER thinkers and researchers to be valued, it could help to boost support of OER work across campuses.
Yeah, like Hilary mentioned, pay is a big issue. So much work that goes into scholarly publishing is unpaid. It's volunteer labor that a lot of us do because it does benefit our careers, but the amount of work that we put into this is akin to a second full-time job. And so that absolutely goes uncompensated. I'm hopeful that we can find some methods of compensation. I don't know where we're going to find it or if we can sustain it, but I'm really hoping that we're able to compensate the labor that we do with more than just the value that it brings to our careers. And I think one way that we can continue to advance transparency about the labor in scholarly publishing is keeping this conversation going. The more we talk about it, the more it's going to become a normal conversation. And the more we push for compensation for this work, the more likely it is that, hopefully open publishing and scholarly publishing as a whole will move towards models of compensation. So that's what I think.
That's great. Yeah, compensation is important. Some people put a lot of value on that, and I think if we can find ways to compensate our people, that'll be good in the long run. All right. So thank you for your honest answers to these questions, Kristina, Hilary, and Casey. So now I give the floor to our audience. What questions do you have for our panelists? I will look for questions in the chat and on the Q&A, but if you'd like to mic in, if you're able to, you can do that as well. So I don't see any